A man discovered something eerie while on a plane. His fingernails had turned black without him noticing. Shortly after, the bottled water in his hand also started to change. On the other side, a flight attendant also sensed something unusual. With her extensive experience, she immediately stood up, climbed onto a seat, and loudly reminded the passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Sure enough, just a second later, the plane entered a turbulent air zone. The water in the cups instantly floated up, and the passengers who didn't have time to fasten their seatbelts were also sucked up into the air by the strong air currents due to the cabin depressurization. In an instant, the entire cabin began to shake violently. Seeing this scene, the passengers were all scared stiff, only able to tightly grip the armrests and silently pray that they would be safe and sound. At this moment, the pilot also realized the crisis and quickly put on his oxygen mask. The cabin's overhead oxygen masks also popped out due to the depressurization. Seeing this, the passengers hurriedly put on their oxygen masks. However, Jack's wife hadn't equipped her oxygen mask in time and had already fallen unconscious prematurely due to difficulty breathing. In order to save his wife, Jack shakily made his way to the flight attendant's work area. He found a bottle of emergency oxygen in the emergency room and quickly put it on his wife, which saved her from the crisis of death. But soon, after a violent jolt, the cabin pressure miraculously returned to normal, and the flight finally made it through an ordeal. The pilot immediately made an announcement to the cabin. It turned out that earlier, when the plane was crossing an air current, it encountered a storm, causing damage to a seal on the plane, which led to problems with the cabin pressure. However, they had already made emergency repairs, and next, they would lower the plane's altitude to stabilize the pressure, so the passengers need not worry too much. It was only then that the passengers finally breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was just a false alarm. Little did they know, an even greater disaster was just beginning. Many people on the plane began to experience strange things one after another. It started with a middle-aged man. He suddenly felt like he couldn't breathe, scaring the flight attendant Lisa, who immediately made an announcement hoping that there was a doctor among the passengers who could help. Jack rushed over as soon as he heard the announcement, but by this time, the man's condition was getting worse and worse. He kept clawing at his mouth with his fingers, and before the crowd could figure out what he was trying to do, a gush of blood suddenly spurted out of the man's mouth. Immediately after, his whole body began to twitch abnormally, like a zombie, but soon, he stopped moving. It wasn't until they put him down on the floor that Jack discovered the man's heart had stopped beating. Because someone had inexplicably died on the plane, the pilot immediately reported the incident to the ground control tower and had the airport confirm the information of the deceased passenger. Since it would take another hour to reach their destination, the crew had no choice but to move the corpse to the business class on the second floor and cover the deceased with a blanket. But not long after, a thief quietly slipped upstairs. It turned out that when the crew was moving the corpse earlier, he had noticed a priceless gold watch on the deceased's wrist. He wanted to quietly take the gold watch, but after pulling it off, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he took out his phone to take a commemorative photo, constantly showing off in front of the camera and even started to insult the deceased. The next second, the corpse turned its head. Then, it stood up, and the young man who was just saved let out a piercing scream.